Three, two, one. Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live, live and uncut podcast with guests from all around the world and people watching live from all around the world. And if you ever want to join us, please do. The links are in my Monday morning newsletter. Tonight, I'm delighted, or this morning, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Beth Moses from Spaceport, New York, New Mexico. Beth is an astronaut, Chief Astronaut Instructor at Virgin Galactic. In 2019, Beth made history being the first female commercial astronaut. She's an elite group of 25. Beth was the first human being ever to unbuckle and float free during a suborbital flight. Since joining Virgin Galactic in 2013, Beth's flown 6 of the 9 missions. Professor Beth, thanks so much for joining us. Will you tell us a little bit about your story? How come you became an astronaut?
I'm happy to tell you a little bit about my story. Hello, Derek. Hello, friends of Derek. Uh, I have recently been asked to join the faculty of Purdue University, which is a top engineering university here in the US. So I'm not yet acting in a professor capacity, so it still takes me by surprise when anybody calls me professor. Hopefully, I will do justice to that term, but I will have to say right off the bat, I am not a professor in the sense that, gosh, everyone I've ever had as a professor would be. I'm sort of a poor man's lecturer, sort of maybe as a writer would be to a real author. I am a lecturer as I would be to a real professor. So pardon me if I don't embrace the honorific professor so readily. It's new to me. But yes, I am an astronaut. That part is true, a suborbital astronaut. And you asked why. I don't actually know why. I always wanted to build and fly spacecraft, always, since before I can remember, since probably before I can speak. I grew up as a child of the space shuttle program. I, watched the launches on TV. Sally Ride was on a poster in my school's library. And when, people always ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always said astronaut, or I always said I want to build spacecraft, or, some derivative of that. Um, and I am fortunate to have been able to pursue exactly that career.
And what did that mean in terms of university and studying and taking lots of your teenage and 20s out of your life, I guess?
Yeah, I don't actually think I had, the typical teenage years or 20 somethings or even 30 somethings that everyone else did. I think I've been in a bar. Well, so I'm saying this to folks that are, part of the pub culture in the UK. So you're all going to cringe when I say this, but I think I've probably been in a bar less than a dozen times in my whole life.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so you're all much more expert at probably basic daily living than I am. Um, but it meant really that I sort of did all the tomboy bookworm space things when I was a kid. Um, I in the summers I built model rockets in my grandmother's yard and sort of chased them through her trees and across her creek. And um, I did. I was the beneficiary of good advice when I was younger. People were looking out for me. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be sane to this day. So teachers sort of encouraged me to take math and science courses, and counselors encouraged me to look at engineering universities. So specifically, I went to a public school outside of Chicago. I grew up outside of Chicago, and I went to the public high school there. But it did have good science and math. Um, Coincidentally, it's the high school that John Hughes, the filmmaker, went to. So you can like see it. You can even see a bunch of my friends in all those movies from the John Hughes era, like Save Ferris or Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Pretty in Pink and all of those. That's my hometown. That's my high school. Um, and from there, I went to Purdue University, which I previously mentioned. It has not only one of the very top aerospace engineering programs in the US, it's also a known feeder school for NASA's human spaceflight program. The early Mercury and Gemini and Apollo astronauts were educated there. Neil Armstrong went there, for example. Um, and they have a student work program with most of the human spaceflight centers. Let's see, someone on here, I can't see the little thumbnail. Carl, I think, mentioned that you're calling in from outside of JPL. Um, Purdue also works a little bit with JPL, which is a sort of a NASA research center of sorts. And I did want to go to Caltech, but Caltech didn't take me. So, I went to Purdue, which in the end I think was good because Purdue has a strong connection to the human spaceflight centers of NASA. And other universities, for example, Caltech, have a strong connection to the more automated, uncrewed spaceflight centers like JPL. So in the end, I think fate routed me toward where I needed to be. So I went to Purdue. I got both a bachelor's and a master's in aerospace engineering, and I alternated semesters of study with NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And then at the end of my degrees, uh, I did want to get a PhD because I thought it might help me apply to the astronaut corps at NASA. But I, again, got some really good advice from some people who were looking out for me. The co-op coordinator at Johnson told me straight up that my only chance of getting a job at Johnson Space Flight Center, which was sort of where I wanted to be really, uh, was if I asked for a job and was lucky enough to receive a job at the end of my master's because they were shutting down hiring, going on a hiring freeze, and it was unknown how long it would be before NASA would hire again. So I sort of had to choose between a PhD and my master's degree. Sorry, a PhD and the job. And I loved what I was working on. I just loved what I was working on. So I asked to be considered for a job. And then I was fortunate. I was the only co-op hired that year, but I was hired. So I left college, finished college at the end of my master's, went off to Johnson Space Flight Center and worked at Johnson for many years.
Wow, fantastic. And where's Purdue University, just for our geography for us Brits?
It's not too far outside of Chicago. It's kind of in the middle of the north part of the US. It's a state school, a land grant school in the state of Indiana. But growing up in Chicago, I sort of considered it not too far from Chicago. It was part of my home region. It's in the Midwest. The actual school is honestly in the middle of cornfields. There's not even really a town there. I mean, it is a huge state school, 40 or 50,000 students at a time. Um, it's got a huge engineering campus and then a huge agriculture campus as sort of an original land grant university. It was founded in 1869, which sounds old to we young Americans, but it's probably not old for, compared to Oxford or any of the venerable institutions you all attended. Um, and it's a pretty serious campus. I mean, I had a bit of fun there, but it's a dry campus, so for an entirety of the town, it's really a town. There are no bars. Another reason I haven't been in a bar more than about 12 times in my life. And actually, most of the engineering students are just sort of way too oversubscribed to do, much in the way of hell raising or fun. So it was a very safe, quiet place to be and a really good place to learn hardcore, independent engineering thinking. I mean, it was difficult. Let's see. Sorry, Carl, again at JPL about this, but I loved orbital mechanics so much that I took it twice, if you catch my drift. It was
Wow.
very
So Beth, tell us about how you actually got into the space area. And I didn't know when we talked last week what a suborbital flight was. So you'll have to go back to some basics for me and some of my friends.
Yeah, yeah. Suborbital just means essentially ballistic. You go straight up and then come straight back down, as opposed to orbital, which means you go around the Earth, which is faster. It just takes more speed, not more altitude. You're in space regardless. It's just a question of how fast you're going. If you're going fast enough to keep going around the Earth instead of falling back to Earth, then you're orbital. If you don't have that much speed, so if you're only going, say, Mach 3 or 4, you come right back down. That's what I did. If you're going Mach 25, you're going fast enough to continue around the Earth. And then, of course, as we saw recently with Artemis, there are also lunar trajectories, which are going fast enough to fly in the neighborhood of the moon and then get, sort of captured, slingshotted by the moon's gravity back to Earth. So those are the three that are in use right now in terms of human space trajectories: suborbital, orbital, and lunar. And I was at NASA for many years and I helped engineer the International Space Station. But when it was complete, when it was fully assembled on orbit, Um, my team, we kind of all looked at each other like, wait, what? It's finished. It worked. It fit together. Well, now what do we do?
Oh, wow.
And and I absolutely loved development and verification, human in the loop testing of spacecraft. I just loved that. And at NASA, I did apply. My eyes were not good, and NASA's eyesight requirements were very stringent for many, many years. So it was sort of toward the end of the assembly of the space station where NASA finally accepted LASIK surgery for astronaut applicants. And I did go off and get LASIK surgery, and I did apply, but it was sort of a little too late. I was a little too old to launch on a Soyuz. That's a bit of a hard launch, actually a hard landing, really. Um, and I really only had one shot at it. So I applied, my sort of one shot to apply to the NASA Astronaut Corps, and I wasn't selected, and I did not expect to be selected. They have like 9 or 10,000 applicants for, maybe 9 or 10 slots. So no surprise, I wasn't selected. But I did want to see if I could find another way to fly to space as a working professional. And I also wanted to keep developing and verifying human spacecraft. I mean, I loved that. So I looked around when the space station was complete. At the same time, the shuttle was retired, and also the Constellation program was canceled. So NASA was sort of temporarily out of the business of doing development and verification of spacecraft, human spacecraft. But commercial companies were starting up. It was sort of the Wild West era. There were a bunch of commercial companies that were starting to develop and verify human spacecraft. Um, I worked a bit with SpaceX, not for SpaceX, and I kept my eye on Blue Origin and Sierra Nevada and Virgin Galactic, which is suborbital. And in the end, I sort of thought Virgin Galactic was maybe the lead horse in that race. And I sort of thought Virgin Galactic had all the signs of, being sort of of taking the torch of human spaceflight once NASA sort of stopped for a little while. Um, so SpaceX and Virgin Galactic had a little bit of a bidding war, and I went and joined Virgin Galactic at the time. And just to sort of clarify something you said earlier, Derek, I'm actually not with Virgin Galactic any longer. I retired from Virgin Galactic when they stopped flying not too long ago, and they'll fly again. But they stopped flying Unity, their first spacecraft, and at that time, several of us that had built it and tested it decided we needed a break. We were all exhausted. So
Mm.
we retired, myself, the chief pilot, the lead of flight test, several other sort of inaugural leaders from the company retired at the same time. So I went off to retire, and then Purdue recently dragged me out of retirement to fly again. Actually, they've asked me to fly in 2027. So I'll be a researcher on board an academic charter flight in 2027.
Wow. What does it mean to be an engineer on a space flight?
Well, it depends. I mean, they can mean a whole bunch of different things. In my case, I flew 6 times as an engineer on board Virgin Galactic's vehicle, which was called Unity. Uh, and my job changed throughout those 6 flights. And I have to say, I'm so fortunate. I know that's not an opportunity that's given to many. And I am very honored and humbled and kind of like I'm still shocked that, not only was I asked to fly once, but then I was asked to fly 6 times as an engineer, 2 different boards of directors, 2 different CEOs. Apparently, I did the job reasonably well. I know I never screwed the pooch. I was also never perfect, but apparently I did the job reasonably well. So I kept being selected for future flights, which was amazing. But the job changes depending on the flight and the purpose of the flight. My first 3, I flew in the test flight program, and it was to test the systems in the cabin effectively. And then my last 3, I escorted paying customers to space. And depending on what those customers were after on their flight, depending on sort of the nature of the flight, I had a different job. Each time I flew, I did have emergency response duties and tasks, which is really what I trained the most for. But fortunately, no emergency was ever declared on any of those 6, so I didn't have to put, some of that training into practice.
Wow. Now you've got a few slides to show us, haven't you? A few pictures of, yep. Should we
If
go
you'd
through
like,
that?
yeah, sure.
Yes, please. That'd be
Well,
fantastic.
so I'm happy to share them, although with my, the caveat that I gave Derek when he asked about this right before this call. Um, I just got back from speaking to young girls in Indianapolis, which is a city not too far from Purdue. We have something here called the Girl Scouts. I think you call it in the UK, you call it the Girl Guides, is
Yeah.
sort of the same kind of thing. Yeah. Um, and I really, really, really believe in, paying it back and paying it forward. And so I give a few pro bono talks each year. And I went and spoke to the Girl Scouts of Indianapolis. So that's where these pictures come from. So please forgive the initial slide, which is of Indianapolis. Let me see if I can share this. Just a moment. I'm going to share and then I'm going to put it into presentation mode. Let me know when you see.
Yeah, we've got it in regular mode. So yeah, that's in presentation mode. Fantastic. Let's go for it.
Okay, so this is a picture from the space station, which my team helped engineer, of Indianapolis, which is where I spoke a couple of days ago. But if you just Google, say Pasadena from space or London, or I think you said Essex earlier from space, there are many, many, many pictures taken from the space station. You can see exactly where you are. You might even be in the picture. This happens to be the Midwest of the U.S.
How high up would that be?
This would be, I think, about 240 miles. I don't know this exact like
No,
zoom,
okay.
they probably zoomed and that kind of thing. But the space station more orbits, I believe, and somebody can correct me if I've got my facts wrong. I want to say 240 miles, maybe sometimes as high as 400, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
Not higher, probably three times, if not more, higher than I went. And I'll show you images in this deck later of our altitude, my altitude that I flew to. Um, so this is a shot from Purdue. We've already spoken about Purdue. It's a venerable institution with some hardcore engineering. It aims to be, and I think it already is, the most consequential engineering university on the globe. And honestly, it has something called the Cradle of Astronauts. You mentioned in your intro something about 25 astronauts. That's the Cradle of Astronauts from Purdue. It's actually up to 30 now. Purdue prides itself on educating individuals that then go on to become professional astronauts. I was so proud when they invited me into that cradle because prior to me, it was all NASA astronauts and almost all military men, to be honest. The likes of Neil Armstrong, Jerry Ross, those kind of people. Um, who I worked with some at NASA, and the Apollo era were my heroes basically. But I wasn't so sure. I flew for a private company. When you hear the term commercial astronaut, that's what that means. It means an astronaut who flew either as a professional like I did or as a tourist on a system that was built with private money, not with government money. So I really wasn't sure how Purdue was going to respond to my flight. I, you know, I I stayed in touch with Purdue. I'm on some of their advisory boards. I always have been. I called them up before my flight and asked if they would send a pennant that I could take to space with me because that's something of a tradition. Um, but then afterwards, they formed a committee and they had a ton of meetings and they tried to figure out what do we do with this new thing in the world? What do we do with this new thing called a commercial astronaut? It's a professional, who's an engineer, obviously leaning on my degree and what Purdue taught me, but it's a private thing, not a government thing, and it's not a NASA astronaut and it's not an orbital astronaut. So what do? Am I part of the cradle of astronauts or not? And they opted to include essentially new space, the newcomers in the field, into their cradle of astronauts. Part of why they did, I believe, and I wasn't in the meetings, but part of I think what they did is because uh, the original astronauts in the US were, although they were government, they were suborbital. Um, Gus Grissom, his first flight was suborbital Mercury. The X-15 pilots that went above 50 miles but not into orbit. They were dubbed astronauts by the federal government. So, in terms of trajectory, there was precedent that qualified commercial suborbital astronauts. And then I think the question came down to essentially, is it a hardcore engineering role or not? And mine was. And so they inducted me into the cradle of astronauts. And at that time, I was the 25th. And I'm very proud to be a Purdue astronaut. I might even be a little bit more proud of being a Purdue astronaut than just an astronaut. But I did
And
go to Purdue.
how many female astronauts?
In the cradle?
Yeah,
That is a great question.
just you.
No, no, no. That no. I stand on the shoulders of giants, male and female. Prior to me, there were several female shuttle era astronauts that graduated Purdue, and many shuttle era female astronauts. So off the top of my head, I can name some of the Purdue astronauts: um, Mary Ellen Weber, Janice Voss. Um, well, that might be all. It's at least two that I can remember. It might be a few more. Uh, and then and then I was the first female commercial astronaut from any university. I was also the first female commercial astronaut who went to Purdue. So I was the first female commercial astronaut in Purdue's cradle of astronauts. People slice and dice these statistics a bunch of different ways. And for those of you in the UK, if you're a space fan, I completely respect if you don't honor some of these numbers because different regions of the globe have different thresholds for space. The US historically, the government, the US government, the FAA, the Air Force, and NASA have all historically considered 50 miles to be the boundary of space. However, Europe considers it to be 100 kilometers, which is 83 miles.
No.
And Russia considers it to be orbit. So, everybody's slicing and dicing history sort of based on who they sent first where, right? So apologies. And for the UK, your first astronaut who had any tie to the UK, I believe, was Helen Sharman, who was a shuttle payload specialist, who was orbital. So, you can count me or not count me, whatever.
We
I'm
count, we
American. I
count,
flew from America. I count me.
we count you, and we're delighted that you're here. So let's have a look at some more of your slides.
Yeah, so I clicked over here to this one, which I think you're seeing, which is the International Space Station at assembly complete. I engineered this for 20 odd years. Well, more. If I say the exact numbers, I will definitely date myself and age myself. So I'll try not to, you know, claim that I'm old here. But this was a labor of love. I'm still exceptionally proud of the entire global team that put this space station together, including the UK and others. Um, just maybe a few fun facts, I guess. I mean, it's still in space right now. It is a international research laboratory. It was built by 5 space agencies, 15 countries and counting, maybe more by now. Um, as an engineer, I was astounded to learn. Well, I started when it was on the drawing board, just drawings, no hardware, right? But through the course of my time at NASA, uh, in the end, it was never fully assembled on the ground, which astonishes me as an engineer. I mean, the odds of it then, all fitting together and working on orbit are much lower if you've never actually plugged it all in together on the ground. And it did in the end fall to me and my team to do all the fit checks of the external hardware on every segment other than the Russian segment. So what you're looking at here is Russian hardware sort of at the bottom of the screen, and then international hardware everywhere else, sort of the top of the screen. The bulk of this picture is international hardware, but the international hardware that was not Russian was integrated and contracted and organized by NASA, by the US. So most of what you see in this picture was called, embarrassingly, called the US operating segment, which meant US and all of the US's partners. It's like, I mean, it's so American, and I'm so sorry. Like, we call some sporting event the World Cup when it's only American teams. We did the same thing with the space station, and I'm sorry, I wasn't in charge. I might have advocated for something different. But we call most of this the US operating segment, even though it's got Japan and Italy and a bunch of other countries. But it did fall to me as I was the system manager for the EVA system of the space station, which means all of the spacewalk components of the space station, which is the outside, essentially the entire outside. So most everything you're looking at in this image that is not Russian fell to my team to make sure it could work from a human in the loop perspective on orbit. So anytime you see an astronaut doing a spacewalk in a US spacesuit, the big white puffy ones, and they're doing work on the outside of the space station, they're working on interfaces that my team had to make sure could work on orbit. Simple things like, does the plug reach the socket? And in most cases, the answer originally was no, it wouldn't. And we had to go change all the hardware and get funding to change all the hardware and convince different state departments from different companies to change all the hardware so that it would fit. But in the end, it did. I mean, this is the culmination of many, many space shuttle launches. Uh, I worked on the major assembly flights, 2A through 20A. There were also smaller flights that were outfitting flights and pallet flights, but the major assembly flights each put a chunk of what you see into orbit, and then there were a handful of spacewalks on each shuttle flight to connect and power it all. And that's what my team worked on. And I started in the proverbial mailroom. I mean, I started as a scuba diver in a neutral buoyancy lab as a student, as a college student, and I ended up leading the international teams that made sure it all fit together. And it did. Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness, I see some claps. Wow. No need to. I mean, I was honored. I was shocked. It was a big job. I was really pleased to have it. It sort of, exhausted me. It's another reason I've almost never been in a bar because, if you're doing this and if you work for a government that has, mandatory random drug testing, you don't tend to go to the bar at night. You tend to go home and collapse and go to sleep.
Well,
But then you do this. Oh, sorry,
well,
Derek, what'd you say?
Beth, when you come to London, we'll take you out to a couple of bars, all right? And don't worry, you'll be
Okay,
there. What
you're gonna have to teach me pub culture and that kind of thing. I do know what I
Oh,
like to drink,
we'll do
but
that. We've had to do that with Patricia, so we'll do it with you. Don't
yes,
worry.
we lame Americans and Canadians, I'm so sorry. But anyway, this is what I engineered along with a very robust team for, I don't know, many years. Again, I won't date myself. I will say most of the time I worked at NASA, I worked directly for or with the astronaut office. And they had largely learned from their predecessors of Apollo and Mercury and Gemini. I did work with a few Apollo era astronauts. John Young was in several meetings. He wouldn't know me, from a hill
Right.
of beans. But um, uh, I do think that the success of the space station rests on Apollo and Mercury and Gemini because the best practices and the important things to test and the gotchas, the hardcore independent engineering that has to go into it, that all came sort of down the pike to me from those
Wow.
legends.
Wow.
Um, and I personally was the engineer that sort of tested everything before the astronauts came in and tested it or trained for it. Some engineer has to go in and do the like grunt work and develop the procedures and find the big issues. And then the astronauts come in and you get like a group of astronauts, different sizes and capabilities, and to make sure. Anyway, long story short, in my years at NASA, I did all the testing myself that then qualified me later to go to space with a private company. And so what I mean by that is um, I lost count. I did thousands of dives in neutral buoyancy facilities around the globe as a working diver, an engineer, working diver, like going down, building mock-ups, attaching mock-up connectors, that kind of thing, on scuba. And I loved it. I mean, I love scuba. I love being underwater. But I did thousands of dives. I did hundreds of parabolas in what's called the vomit comet, which is a weight to weightless test hardware in an airplane. It just flies parabolas in the air and you get a little bit, few seconds, 20 or 30 seconds of weightlessness. So I did hundreds of those. Um, and I was in a human thermal vacuum chamber dozens of times, and I was the emergency egress uh, test subject for human thermal vacuum chamber tests. So I had a lot of hardcore hands-on engineering and testing under my belt before I went to the private sector. And I think that mattered because when the space station was finished and I sort of looked around at who was doing development and verification and who was flying humans, I found Virgin Galactic. I applied online to work at Virgin Galactic, and they hired me as their chief astronaut instructor, but that also encompassed cabin engineering and cabin testing. And all of this experience from space station, I'm sure, is why they selected me in that interview.
Wow.
Um, so
So what's
this
that?
is, this is node 3 of the International Space Station. It's on the ground, and that's me with a little paper mock-up of the thing I'm holding. So this is a part of the space station. It's on orbit now. You can kind of see some of the boxes and gizmos that are on the outside. We made sure all the connectors fit, and those things could be removed and replaced over the course of the space station life. The shiny metal part is debris shielding. Anyway, this is a close-up of the space station and me. And actually, I was the signature authority for government acceptance of the major elements of the space station, the outside of the space station. So this is kind of my testament to, yes, I believe it will work, which it did on orbit. Uh, anyway, that all qualified me to go work at Virgin Galactic and then to ultimately be selected as Virgin Galactic's first cabin test engineer. So that meant that in February of 2019, I launched to space with Virgin Galactic for the first time. And this is a shot of my first glance of Earth out the window. And I mean, literally, my jaw dropped.
Wow.
So what you're seeing in this picture is me. I mean, and I'm astounded at what I see out the window. But if you sort of look more closely, I am floating a foot or two above my seat. You can see my seat and my seat belt behind me.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Um, so that gray stuff behind me is the seat and the seat belt. I'm wearing a parachute and a comm setup and a pair of safety goggles that look like sunglasses. And I'm looking out the window. And we are at this point, the vehicle, actually, the nose. So I'm looking out the right side window. I'm above my seat, looking out the right side window, floating weightless. The nose of the ship is pointing straight up. So I'm sort of like on my back, except I'm weightless. And I've floated above my seat and turned and I'm looking. And the vehicle is still coasting straight up. And I had to sort of look sort of past, halfway out the window before I could see the Earth beneath us. So you're looking down. I mean, actually, compared to Earth, you're looking down at the Earth in this shot. And out the window, you can see the wing of the ship, which is sort of folded up in half. It does that. And you can see Earth. And my first words were literally, oh, I can see the limb of the Earth, which is that curvature you can see. It was
Mm.
amazing. I'll never forget it. Uh, and I think the important thing here is not me. I mean, I'm in that last picture and it was an honor to fly. But I think the important thing is all of us and the Earth. This is an image from an Apollo flight, Apollo 17, on the way to the moon. I didn't see the whole Earth. I saw about 1,000 miles worth of Earth. But the reason I do this, the reason I've always done this, the reason it's always called to me is because I think it unites humanity in a way that we are all only now beginning to appreciate. I think we are all living through the dawn of what historians might one day call the space age. And I think it's sort of a global epiphany that is unfolding slowly that will help us all in ways we probably can't imagine. I mean, I'm talking about the technical stuff. I'm talking about, engineering and hardware. I don't actually think that's the important part, even though that's the part I love doing. I think the important thing is that humanity simply does this, that we go to space, not just the engineers and the pilots, but everyone, anyone, because I think it unites us all. Looking back on the Earth is amazing and indescribable. This image that you see on your screen now, this is called the Blue Marble. It is the most downloaded image on the planet. And I think that says something about all of us. And I think the fact that every kid looks up at the stars and wonders and wants to explore, and everybody downloads this image and feels some affinity for it, I think that's the important thing. Actually, since most of you are British, let's see if I can get this quote right. In 1948, there was a British astronomer and mathematician, Fred Hoyle, I believe, Hoyle, I'd have to go look it up, who said something close to the moment a photograph of Earth from the outside is available, an idea as powerful as any in history will be let loose. And forgive me, Fred Hoyle, if I've slightly misquoted you, but that I believe is the dead truth. And he said that and wrote that before humanity had ever left the planet, before I had left the planet, before anyone had seen it with their own eyes. And I think he's right. I think it really matters. I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish or too, unrealistic, especially given world events today. But I honestly think if you like locked all the squabbling world leaders into a spacecraft above Earth and made them just look down together, I think it would matter. I just really do. I don't think seeing Earth from space can cure pure evil. I don't. But I do think it can slowly marinate us into world peace.
Wow. So
So that, go ahead.
tell me what was it like coaching the paying passengers on Virgin Galactic?
Yeah, I have a photo of that too. Let's see. There's a few of the paying customers. What was it like coaching them? Well, it was a real honor. Virgin Galactic has only barely begun to fly paying customers to space. They have a huge line even now. I mean, I don't work for them, I don't speak for them, but there are a bunch of folks that have bought tickets to fly. And here are three of them and me in this is just one of my flights. Um,
So everyone's floating around there, are they, Beth?
yes, so what you're looking at, you're looking from the cockpit back into VSS Unity, which was Virgin Galactic spacecraft. It flew 12 times. Um, before it was retired. I was on six of those flights, and I was in the cabin with people for all six of my flights. And for three of them, they were paying customers, like we mentioned earlier. So I am trying to stay out of their way. I'm sort of got my head and my back sort of against the cockpit wall, essentially. Sorry, there's so much of me in this image. I'll explain why in a minute. It was to make a point to the Girl Scouts that I spoke to recently. And then the other three are enjoying their time in the cabin. One is looking sort of out the window and he's about to come closer to the window, and two are sort of tumbling weightless. Sorry, it's a still image, not a video. But coaching them, it's a training program before they fly, and it's an honor and a bit of a concern in the sense that you want to make sure they like at least understand what they've signed up to do. It is surprising some of them don't understand what they've signed up to do. Some of them were sold something that isn't real. Like some of them bought tickets so long ago that they think they're going to the moon. They're not, I mean, you get it, sales, right? Sales and marketing. So a lot of it is just making it real for them before they go so that they understand and can ask all their questions and aren't so surprised. The main point for me was to make sure they could savor their space flight, especially the time in space, however they wanted to, so that they would get the most out of it, have any epiphany they might have any joy they might have. Um, and it was a real honor. You asked earlier, what was my job as an engineer? Part of my job on my first flight as a test engineer was to discover the unknown unknowns. That was literally the first test objective in the formal test plan. And of course, my team had sent sensors and cameras and crash test dummies up before I went. I mean, it would be irresponsible not to do so. So we had some idea from all of that data what a person in the cabin might experience. But we also knew, and I certainly knew from all my years of NASA testing, that there would be unexpected events and unknown unknowns, and we would need to evaluate those before we sent customers, especially customers with sort of basic customer training. So a couple examples from my first flight of things we discovered that then rolled into training the customers. One, for Unity, and this ship has been retired. I don't know if it'll be true for other ships or not, but for Unity, silica ablates off the rocket nozzle and then flakes off of the rocket nozzle in space, and it floats around the outside of the ship. So on my end, nobody had spotted that in any of the camera imagery before I flew. I mean, to be fair, I flew on the second flight that Unity ever went to space. So it's not like we had a bunch of, it's not like we had a whole lot of video to look at. It was one flight worth of video, but I went on the second flight and I unstrapped and my jaw dropped and you saw that picture. But then I actually had to interrupt my timeline. I was on a very scripted timeline. I trained down to the half second for four different timelines, for all contingencies. And I interrupted that scripted engineering procedure because I saw something outside the window and I needed to figure out if it was a risk to the ship or if it was something the pilots needed to be notified of because They can't see behind them, and I can because I'm up weightless in the cabin and can look at the whole back of the ship. Um, so I did. I watched this thing. I didn't know what it was. I've already told you what it was. It was silica from the rocket motor, but nobody knew that. I watched this thing until I could figure out that it didn't have tentacles. It wasn't waving hello, and it wasn't coming too close to the ship. It was near, but it was going to miss the nose. So I watched it until I ascertained that it was no factor, and then I resumed my test. Um, but training these customers, I then informed these customers that they might see something out the window. It looked like I was inside a snow globe. And so I told these customers, if you look out the window and you feel like you're inside a snow globe, that's fine. It's no risk. It's beautiful. Enjoy it, but don't fixate on it. Look at the earth. Don't worry about the snowflake. Look at the earth. So that's an example. And then the other thing, and I'm really proud of these customers and actually all the customers I trained. The other thing that we learned in test that we rolled into training was as the pilots are steering the ship in space with just these little compressed air nozzles, the ship will move, but the people inside won't if they're floating weightless like this. So you can see them in the middle. Um, one of them is holding onto a seat. The other two may not be holding onto anything other than each other in the back. You can kind of see they're holding on to each other. So these two in the back, if the pilots steer the ship at that moment, they aren't going to move with respect to the ship. The ship is going to move with respect to them. So on my first flight, I got a spaceship kiss because the pilot was Mike Masucci was steering the ship as he was supposed to. He did nothing wrong, but I got a little spaceship kiss. And then we had to roll that into revised pilot procedures. The pilots are not allowed to steer much when people are out of their seat. And we rolled it into customer training, asking customers, there are now announcements, at least there were for Unity. I don't know what it'll be going forward, but for Unity, there were moments where we asked the customers to hold on to something so that if the ship moves slightly, they're aware of it. So that's an example of what training was like. It's not all, ooh, here's the Earth and what it'll look like. It's actually far more tactical and physical and practicing of seatbelts and practicing of holding on and letting go and that kind of thing.
And how long were you in space for?
Not very long. Suborbital's pretty quick. The whole flight each time was about 2 hours. And then the time after rocket motor cutoff before entry was anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes per flight. So just a few minutes.
And how does re-entry work?
Well, it's happening no matter what. It's, it doesn't necessarily work so much as it happens. Well, I mean, in an ideal scenario, the pilots point the belly toward Earth, sort of a bit of a belly flap through the atmosphere, aero braking, and the pilots announce to the cabin that it's coming up, and everyone in the cabin, including me, gets strapped in and settled. You can see we're wearing parachutes, and you can see there's like a hole in the back of the seat. The parachute has to be docked into that hole, so you kind of, go get in your seat, dock your parachute, fasten all your seat belts. And then entry is high G. It's actually, I think it's higher. Well, I won't misquote. It's high G. It might be higher than shuttle was. It's over 4G. And so for me, entry, because I was working as an engineer on each flight and I had safety critical duties. So for me, entry was something that I had to manage actively and stay ahead of and keep my body ahead of, because just after entry, the wings unfold. It's called defeather. And if there's some kind of delay or issue with that, I had duties that I had to perform that meant getting up and doing something very physically demanding. So for me, entry was something I had to stay capable throughout and stay ahead of physically and mentally and emotionally and everything else. And it's intense. Entry is incredibly intense. So for me and for anyone who chooses and is trained to do so, I do an anti-destraining maneuver and I keep track of the time and I keep track of the trajectory and the altitude, keep my eye on the horizon, listen for pilot callouts. Like I'm working actually. Probably entry is the hardest, most demanding, most intense physical work I've ever done. For customers, and for people who don't have a job to do, everybody sort of reports it differently. They talk about it as intense. It's sort of mind blowing. It's very loud, very physical. It's suborbital, so it's not fiery like orbital or lunar trajectories can be. So if if you're picturing like Hollywood, like flames out the window, it's not that. There's no, it's not fiery, but it is extremely visceral. I remember my first flight. I'll never forget entry on my first flight. I was completely prepared and secured for it. I was in my seat, I was strapped in, everything was fine. I was looking where I was supposed to. I was ahead of the curve emotionally, physically. I was ahead of the aircraft, etc. And still my exact thought was, and forgive me, I'm gonna curse a little bit. Just forgive me since it's a small group here, was holy shit, my cells are ripping through the atmosphere. Like there was a ship around me, there was a heat shield under me. I was strapped in with a 5-point harness, and yet I was feeling it in my cells at the cellular level. But it's um, it's something of a bookend. The former Virgin Galactic chief pilot loves Dave McKay, who flew me to space a few times. Um, he likes to talk about it as a bookend. There's boost, which is high G and intense, and then there's this lovely space epiphany that's quiet and soulful. And then there's strapping in for entry, which is another visceral experience. And those two bookends kind of encapsulate the suborbital space journey.
Wow. Wow. I don't know what to say, really. I don't know what to ask you. What have I missed? What haven't I asked you before we wrap this up? What did the girl guides ask you that I haven't asked you?
Oh, the Girl Guides were amazing. I mean, I had a room of, gosh, hundreds, maybe 1,000, I think over 1,000. It was Girl Guides and their parents. And they asked me questions for well over half an hour. What did they miss? It was so wide-ranging. Well, I guess the one thing they asked about that might be relevant or interesting, hopefully interesting, was what was it like from the top of my flights? Um, and that's called apogee, and so I'll describe that because it will always stay with me. This particular trajectory that I was a part of purposely flies upside down. The ship coasts to a stop and then starts falling back to Earth. And the ship turns upside down so that as it is coasting to the top, all the windows are facing Earth. And I'll never forget the feeling of that sort of coasting to a stop, 295,000 feet above the Earth. That first flight, it was a perfect trajectory and a perfect stop. I mean, kudos to Dave McKay. He was the pilot on the stick on that flight, my first flight. He's the first Scottish astronaut, by the way. UK again. Thank you, UK. Um, and there were three of us on that, Dave, Such, and myself. And I was purposely up near the cockpit looking out the cockpit windows. And I purposely had gotten myself ready for apogee and let go of everything because was theorizing that that would be the best experience for future customers. And I wanted to know what it was like and how to train them and where they should be and that kind of thing. So I was purposely just hovering in space. The ship was completely still around me. The pilots were in front of me in their street seats, but they were strapped in. I was unstrapped purposely. And we all just looked out and went, oh. And to this day, it feels timeless and endless. I don't know how long it was. I mean, we studied frame by frame, but the experience of it was completely different than the engineering of it. It felt endless. I think because we coasted to a complete stop and then very slowly started picking back up. I think it's the equivalent of like if you're taking a train through a town and you see a beautiful field of flowers, that's one thing. That's maybe like orbital travel. But if you stop and get off the train and walk into the field and smell the flower and then go get back on the train, I think that's what this particular suborbital trajectory is. And so we were stopped at the top, and I could see halfway up the west coast of the US, halfway down Mexico, the western coast of Mexico. It felt like I could see around the curve of the Pacific Ocean. We launched out of Mojave Air and Spaceport in California. And then down below me, it happened to have snowed in Southern California recently. It's not common, but all the mountain ranges below me were snow-capped and they were just glistening. And I told a journalist afterwards who was asking what it was like. I was like, well, gosh, it looked like the earth was wearing her diamonds for us that day. It was just this glistening, beautiful. But more than that, since we were stopped, I feel like I could sense and maybe even see the like swells in the water, the currents in the water,
Mm.
and the sort of currents in the wispy clouds that were below. Like Earth was alive. I can still picture it and feel it. She was more than our home planet. It was an alive Earth. And you feel so microscopically, infinitesimally unimportant, and yet so amazingly tall. It's so hard to describe. And from that point on, I mean, to this day, I have a different view of like my fellow humans than I have before. Like when I landed, I was like, oh, that guy who was always a jerk in a meeting. Yeah, he's just another human. Yeah, I mean, of course, he's still a jerk in a meeting, right? Of course. But like, I don't care anymore. It's like, oh, he's a human. We're all on Earth together. Like, it's fine. And I have this sense I know climate change. I understand as an engineer what's going on in the world. I understand geopolitics to a degree. Like still, it's fine. It's okay. Uh, anyway, that's what Apogee is like.
Beth, that has been a fantastic presentation. Can I congratulate you on everything you've done? Absolutely amazing. And I love the metaphor that you maybe don't even realize you said there. Get off the train and smell the flowers. I think we all need to get off the train and smell the flowers. Maybe not get off the space shuttle and smell the flowers, but Professor Beth Mosey, thank you so much for joining us. And can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the vote of thanks in the normal way? Thank you so much. And when I've stopped the recording, will you stay on and for a little while and answer some questions? Fantastic.
Absolutely. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you so much.